Hey, good morning, everybody. 10 Tampa Bay meteorologist Grant Gilmore here with you. Just making sure we've got everything working the way that we need it to, and we can start talking about what's going on in the tropics. Obviously, you're tuning in. You want to know about Tropical Depression 9. So let's talk about it. I've got your questions and comments and all of the like over here just off to the side. So, of course, at any point, if you want to throw in a question, you can, and I'll try to catch it. If I miss it, though, just swing back through, ask the question again, and I'll try to get you answered for what we're dealing with here. Kind of dealing with a little bit of an issue here. I'm kind of locking up. Here we go. All right. Can you guys hear me? Are you guys able to hear me? I think so. Hopefully we should be good. All right, so Tropical Depression 9, we just got the 11 o'clock advisory from the Hurricane Center. No significant changes. It's still tracking to the west-northwest now, so it's starting to pull away from Curacao and South America. Wind speeds are at 35 miles per hour, but we're really going to begin to see this thing organize as we head through the next couple of days, if not just the next 24 hours. One thing I do want to point out, though, you see the storm sort of noted right there on the eastern side of all those thunderstorms. That's because there's a lot of wind shear, keeping storms from developing actually over the center of the storm. All the storms are over on the west side of it, so that will limit its development in the meantime. So that's probably going to stall any sort of significant strengthening for the time being, but we'll eventually start to see it strengthen pretty quickly. No watches or warnings out for anywhere in the Caribbean right now, or even the state of Florida, so we're waiting for those. We may start to get some of those later today into tomorrow. We'll see. But this is the latest forecast cone from the Hurricane Center. We see it maintaining tropical storm strength through Sunday, actually, before potentially rapidly intensifying as it approaches western Cuba into Monday afternoon, Monday night, and then becoming a Category 2 hurricane sometime in that time period. It'll weaken a little bit when it moves over western Cuba. That area there isn't as mountainous as the terrain over in eastern Cuba, but still, land interaction nonetheless is probably going to weaken it a little bit. And then it looks like just all the warm waters there in the Florida Straits and the southeastern Gulf of Mexico are going to be sufficient fuel to see this thing potentially strengthen once again as it starts to approach the southwest Florida coast. Now, this is going into Wednesday morning. The latest advisory from the Hurricane Center has it strengthening a little bit more than what they initially said it would do for that 5 o'clock cone, the first cone that we had. So now up to 115 mile per hour winds, whereas this morning's forecast cone and forecast had it up to 110 miles per hour. So they've upped it about 5 miles per hour, which would be just enough to make it a Category 3 hurricane as opposed to a strong Category 2 hurricane. One of the reasons for that is just all of the heat content, or just all of the fuel that's there in the western Caribbean, and then coming up from the Caribbean into the southern and southeastern Gulf of Mexico through the Florida Straits. So you see the forecast models with those spaghetti plots really bringing the likelihood of the track right over where we have a fair amount of heat to then be that fuel to cause the system to strengthen pretty rapidly as it continues to track up to the north and east. Now, I will say there's still a fair amount of uncertainty right here north of Cuba and where it's going to track. Does it take more of a northeasterly track, or is it going to go more to the north into southwest Florida? Still something to figure out there. We've got about a 24 to 36 hour period here where we're going to get a couple of hurricane hunters to fly in the storm. We're going to see the storm really start to materialize. So I think give it a good 24 to 36 hours to see what's going to happen here. But we will see all of these spaghetti models, or those individual forecasts, start to come in a little bit more in tighter agreement as we head through the next couple of days. This is a map that shows you when we can expect the probability of tropical storm force winds arriving. This is a good map for preparation purposes. When you start talking about when you need to have your hurricane prep wrapped up, that's going to be by the time that the tropical storm force winds arrive. So we're looking at some time through midday to early afternoon on Tuesday. We would be most likely seeing those tropical storm force winds arrive. If they do, I think that's still an if at this point, not a guarantee. When you look at the probability of seeing those tropical storm force winds, obviously the farther south the more likely you will be, just to the closer proximity to where the storm is most likely to pass at this point. But for Tampa and the immediate Tampa Bay area, we're working with about a 30% chance that we would see those tropical storm force winds. And then down towards Fort Myers, it's more of a 60, and then Key West is, almost a guarantee going to be seeing those tropical storm force, if not hurricane force winds arriving. For Key West, looks like it would be sometime early Tuesday morning, if not overnight Monday night into Tuesday morning. So that's the probability. That's what we're working with for the most part right now. The main takeaways at this hour are still kind of a wait and see, though we really need to be referencing those hurricane plans, making sure you've got things in order, you've got a backup plan to anything that you might need to do to get things in order for the early to mid part of next week if we do in fact see this storm come in our direction. That tropical depression is going to be a little slow to develop at first, so just because we don't see it develop right away doesn't mean that we're not going to have a hurricane bearing down on the Florida coast through early next week. Remember, we're probably not going to see that real quick ramp up of intensification until we head into Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday as it approaches. So we've got a weekend ahead. The forecast looks really nice for our weather here this weekend, so I think it's a good time just to keep tabs on that forecast and then maybe start doing some preliminary preps for just getting ready for a hurricane to come in, and if we have to deal with it, we will, and we'll be ready to do so if the storm approaches. Just a quick note, you may have seen some other notifications coming down. The Atlantic is popping. There's a lot going on out there. We've got, obviously, Tropical Depression 9 forecast to become a tropical storm. And then you have Hurricane Fiona, which is back up to Cat 4 strength right now. Tropical Storm Gaston is going to begin to drift back to the west and then sort of fizzle out and become a remnant low. And then now we have Tropical Depression 10 that just developed off the coast of Africa at 11 o'clock. So Tropical Depression 10 now. Also forecast to become a tropical storm relatively soon. So it's a race, right? It's a race to see if does TD10 become tropical storm Hermine, or does TD9 become tropical storm Hermine. So a couple of possibilities there. If TD10, the one off of Africa, becomes Hermine first, then Ian is the next name on the list for what Tropical Depression 9, the storm that is heading our way, at least to Florida's direction, it would be named. So Hermine and Ian are the next two names on the list. Let me just go back for those of you who are just joining here. Actually, you know what? Let's do this here real quick. We've got a Hurricane Hunter that's flying inside of TD9 right now. I want to see here if we've got any updates. Nothing really all that exciting from TD, or rather from the Hurricane Hunters that are flying in TD9 right now. You see they've made a couple of passes through where they think the center might be. It's been tough to try to really pin down exactly what those wind speeds are. So no significant updates there. Again, still a tropical depression. It goes from a tropical depression to a tropical storm, then a tropical storm to a hurricane, and then so on and so forth through the process of the hurricane scale, which, by the way, is the Saffir-Simpson wind scale. So you got Cat 1, that's a 74 to 95 mile per hour winds. Cat 2, 96 to 110. And then what we're working with for a potential arrival of a Category 3 hurricane here in South Florida and potentially Tampa Bay, that 111 to 129 mile per hour sustained maximum winds. You get stronger wind gusts within the eye wall, certainly, and then within some of those outer bands as they start to spin through. So major hurricane is nothing to mess with. You've got a devastating damage potentially with that, and then you throw in the threat for surge depending on where the landfall would be in that right side of the storm. So on the right side of the storm, that's where you've got the worst impacts, strongest winds, you've got the potential for the highest surge, and you typically have the heaviest rainfall as well. So again, we'll get back to it. Here's TD9 right now. It is, let me see if I can pull up a location for it here. That is not what TD9 is. TD9 is just north of Curacao right now, and it's tracking to the west-northwest at 14 miles per hour. One last check on that forecast cone. If you're just joining us here, I want to show this to you one more time. Make sure you guys see it. Timing, all right? So I'll go through this slow. So becoming a tropical storm tonight into tomorrow, maybe later today, but certainly by tomorrow. Likely slowly strengthening through Saturday into Sunday. You're looking at only an increase of 10 miles per hour in those wind speeds from Saturday morning to Sunday morning. And then by Monday morning, you really see how quickly that intensification begins to pick up to a Cat 1 hurricane by Monday morning. We'll see how much of an interaction and influence Cuba has on it and potentially weakening it. But if you've got a rapidly intensifying storm, it might just be just like a blip on the radar, like almost a speed bump, if you will, before we see that strengthening start to ramp up again as it starts to track towards southwest Florida. At least that's the way it looks right now, and we'll see how that plays out. A couple of things here. I know you guys like to see the models. Of course, we like to look at those too. Those are key and just one of our tools in our toolbox to forecast here. We compare the European model and the GFS model. A lot of people ask which one's better. Both are very good global forecast models, and recently the European has been a little more consistent in where it's been tracking the system. You see even through Sunday at 1:30, still potentially a tropical storm at that point. Fairly good agreement between the two models. The GFS model going a little bit farther west with that. And that's been the general trend, is that the European or the GFS model has been a little bit farther to the west. And then into Monday evening, it shows the GFS model really strengthening that storm quickly. So really firing it up and a little bit more of a westerly track, as it looks like it's just going to clip the western coast of Cuba with a weaker storm farther to the east, suggested by the European model. And an easterly track is going to give it more impact with Cuba, and actually it's going to take it a little bit farther east than the bulk of the heat content in the ocean and the far western Caribbean. So an easterly track actually bodes well for a couple of reasons in terms of bringing a weaker storm out of the Caribbean into the Florida Straits. And then we continue on. There you see 12:30, midnight into Wednesday morning, likely a hurricane still with the European model, but that's where we're looking at the potential for a major hurricane with the GFS model. Hard to ignore that model. It's a very good model. It hasn't been very consistent with the track, but you can't ignore it. You've got to look at it, and what you want to see is both of these models in agreement, and they've gotten better. They've gotten closer to that agreement and that consensus, but it's still not perfect, and that's going to leave that room for the change that we'll see in the forecast in the coming days. So of course, a lot to be learned, discovered, and ultimately realized into the first half of next week. And then it just continues on. The GFS kind of slows it down a little bit. That would be a rain and a flooding threat for inland Florida and over on the East Coast into the second half of next week. So even though you're not looking at a direct landfall on the East Coast of Florida, there very well could be still the potential for some flooding, some heavy rainfall. If that's a slow-moving system, and all that rain is going to be over on the east side of the storm. So you're looking at the East Coast of Florida potentially seeing flooding rains, and there's a little bit of a drought ongoing over there. So that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. You just don't want all that tropical rain all at once. So that would be a concern there. Several concerns, obviously, when you're dealing with a hurricane. You've got the rainfall, the flooding threats, you've got the surge threat, and then just the inherent wind threat that comes along with those Cat 2, Cat 3, and then beyond hurricanes that start to move ashore and come into contact with us and our property, right? One last little check on this one. This is the map that shows you the most likely arrival times for those tropical storm force winds. So we're looking at South Florida into even the Fort Myers area, potentially seeing those tropical storm force winds arrive into Tuesday morning, kind of sunrise-ish through mid-morning, and then maybe not quite reaching up into Tampa Bay until the afternoon hours. So not quite time to be thinking about the full tilt hurricane prep mode and putting everything into motion, but we gotta start thinking about it. We've got today's Friday, 1, 2, 3, 4 days to prepare and get our affairs in order before we would see kind of the closing of that window with the tropical storm force winds arriving. Now, obviously, this can change. This can shift to get a little bit sooner. It can shift to get a little bit later. And then maybe we see this whole swath of probability shift to the east. And maybe we see a curve to the east. Maybe we continue to see more of this track in that direction. So a lot of possibilities at this point. You know, there's a lot on the table for what we could see. You know, I wish I could give more details on the who, what, whens, and where. I mean, we don't even know what this thing is going to be called yet, because the fact that there's another tropical depression way over in the eastern Atlantic off the coast of Africa that could become a tropical storm before this one. So that one would get Hermine. We would see Ian with this one. And then we got to clear up that confusion. So communication and making sure that you're sharing reliable information is so important when we're talking about tropical systems and hurricanes and tropical preparedness, because a lot of misinformation can spread like wildfire. It's scary sometimes how bad information can spread faster than good information. So keep checking back with us here at 10 Tampa Bay. We're working hard to confirm and double check every bit of information that we're passing along to you to make sure that it's clear, concise, and that you guys are getting the most updated information and the most accurate updated information. So we're gonna be with you through this, for better or for worse, right? And we'll make sure to try to do what we can to make sure that you guys have the information that you need to protect yourself and protect your property. So hopefully we won't need to, right? That's always the hope. Hopefully it doesn't turn out to be as bad as it could be, but we always have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So that's it for us, guys. We're going to close this down now. We'll look to do some more of these as we head throughout the rest of the day, if not just through the rest of this event. So we'll be in touch. You guys take care, be safe, and we'll talk to you soon.